In the quiet hours before dawn, when the world is still and the mind begins to drift, we travel back more than 1,000 years, to a land shaped by mist, mountains, and the rhythm of the seasons. This is Japan, long before the modern age, long before cities of glass and steel. A place where forests whispered ancient secrets, where rivers carved stories into the earth, and where human destiny was inseparable from nature itself. In this world, power did not yet belong to warriors. It belonged to the imperial court, to poets and nobles who believed beauty, ritual, and lineage were the true measures of authority. Yet beneath this elegant surface, something restless was forming, something that would change Japan forever. During the Heian period, beginning in the late 8th century, Japan was ruled from the capital city of Heian-kyo, known today as Kyoto. The emperor sat at the center of a refined court culture, surrounded by aristocrats dressed in flowing silk robes, composing poetry beneath cherry blossoms and writing diaries filled with longing and melancholy. These nobles believed that harmony and aesthetics defined civilization. They valued calligraphy, incense ceremonies, and the subtle emotions of love and loss. But far from the capital, beyond the mountains and rivers, the emperor's reach was weak. The countryside told a different story. Provincial lands were vast and difficult to control. Local clans were responsible for maintaining order, collecting taxes, and protecting estates. Over time, these families began to rely not on court officials, but on armed men, fighters trained to defend land, livestock, and honor. These warriors were not yet called samurai, but they were their ancestors. They learned to ride horses across rugged terrain, to draw bows with deadly accuracy, and to face danger with calm resolve. Life in the provinces demanded strength, discipline, and loyalty, qualities that poetry alone could not provide. As generations passed, the imperial court grew increasingly detached from reality. Powerful noble families manipulated succession, while emperors became symbols rather than rulers. Meanwhile, the warrior clans grew stronger. They formed networks of loyalty, bound by blood and obligation. These men lived close to violence, yet their lives were governed by codes of conduct rooted in ancient beliefs. Shinto reverence for ancestors, Buddhist acceptance of impermanence, and Confucian ideas of duty blended into a uniquely Japanese warrior ethic. By the late Heian period, two great clans rose above the rest, the Taira and the Minamoto. Both traced their lineage to the imperial family, yet both lived as warriors, commanding armies rather than court ceremonies. Tension between them simmered for decades, fueled by ambition and rivalry. Eventually, this tension erupted into open conflict. The Genpei War, fought between 1180 and 1185, would decide the fate of Japan. The Genpei War was brutal and transformative. Battles were fought across mountains, rivers, and seas. Warriors clashed with bows and swords, often shouting their lineage before charging into combat. This was a time when individual valor mattered, when a single duel could define a man's reputation for generations. It was also a time of immense suffering. Villages were burned, families displaced, and countless lives lost. Yet from this chaos, a new order emerged. When the Minamoto clan emerged victorious, their leader, Minamoto no Yoritomo, did something unprecedented. Rather than ruling from the imperial court, he established a military government in Kamakura, far from Kyoto. This marked the beginning of the shogunate, a system where real power rested in the hands of a military leader known as the shogun, while the emperor remained a sacred figurehead. Japan had entered the age of the samurai. The rise of the samurai was not merely a shift in power, it was a transformation of values. Strength, loyalty, and honor replaced poetry and courtly intrigue as the foundations of authority. Yet this new world was not simple or peaceful. It was fragile, shaped by constant tension between duty and desire, violence and restraint. As night deepens and the mind grows still, remember that the samurai world was born not in glory, but in uncertainty, carved slowly from the silence of mountains and the blood of battle. With the establishment of the Kamakura shogunate, Japan entered a new rhythm of life, one defined by military rule and a deep sense of order born from discipline. The samurai were no longer just fighters, they became the backbone of governance. These men served their lords not only on the battlefield, but also as administrators, judges, and protectors of the land. Their loyalty was absolute, their obedience expected without question. In return, they received land, status, and a place within a rigid social hierarchy that defined every aspect of their existence. The life of a samurai was shaped from childhood. Boys born into warrior families were trained early in the arts of war. They learned archery before they could read, swordsmanship before philosophy. Yet their education was not limited to combat. Zen Buddhism, newly influential during this period, taught them meditation, focus, and acceptance of death. Through long hours of silent contemplation, samurai learned to still their minds, to face fear without hesitation. Death was not something to be avoided, but something to be understood, even embraced if duty demanded it. Zen's emphasis on impermanence resonated deeply with the warrior class. Life, like the cherry blossom, was fleeting. This belief fostered a calm acceptance of fate, allowing samurai to act decisively in moments of crisis. Alongside Zen, Confucian ideals reinforced loyalty to one's lord and family. A samurai's honor was inseparable from his actions. To fail in duty was worse than death itself. Despite these ideals, the reality of samurai life was harsh. Wars between rival clans continued, and peace was always temporary. Castles rose across the landscape, built of wood and stone, designed as much for defense as for authority. Around them, towns developed, filled with craftsmen, merchants, and farmers whose labor sustained the warrior elite. Society became rigidly stratified. At the top stood the samurai. Below them were peasants, artisans, and merchants, each confined to their role, each essential, yet unequal. The Kamakura shogunate eventually weakened under internal conflict and external threats. In the 13th century, Mongol invasions tested Japan's defenses. Twice, massive fleets approached the shores, and twice, they were repelled, once by fierce resistance, and once by powerful storms remembered as kamikaze, or divine winds. These events reinforced the belief that Japan was protected by the gods, and that the samurai were instruments of a greater cosmic order. Yet victory brought unexpected consequences. The cost of defense was enormous, and many samurai were left unrewarded. Discontent grew. Loyalty, once unquestioned, began to fracture. Over time, the shogunate collapsed, giving way to new power struggles. Japan entered centuries of near-constant warfare, known as the Sengoku, or Warring States period. Lords fought endlessly for territory, alliances shifted like smoke, and survival depended on adaptability as much as honor. Still, even amid chaos, the samurai code endured. It evolved, becoming more formalized into what later generations would call Bushido, the way of the warrior. Courage, integrity, compassion, respect, and loyalty were held as guiding principles, even when reality fell short. These ideals shaped not only warriors, but the soul of Japan itself. As you listen and begin to drift deeper into rest, imagine the quiet moments between battles, a lone samurai polishing his sword by lantern light, the distant sound of wind through bamboo, the weight of duty pressing gently but relentlessly on the heart. This was a world balanced between violence and beauty, where every sunrise could bring war, and every sunset invited reflection. By the late 16th century, after generations of bloodshed, Japan stood at the edge of unification. Three towering figures, Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu, reshaped the nation through ambition, strategy, and relentless will. Their campaigns brought an end to the Sengoku chaos and laid the foundation for lasting peace. Yet peace did not erase the samurai. It transformed them. Under the Tokugawa shogunate, established in 1603, Japan entered a long period of stability. The country was unified under strict centralized control, with Edo, modern-day Tokyo, as the seat of power. Daimyo, the regional lords, were bound by elaborate systems of loyalty and surveillance. Samurai, once roaming warriors, became bureaucrats, scholars, and guardians of order. Their swords remained symbols of status, even as opportunities for battle faded. This era forced the samurai to confront an existential question: who are we when war is no longer our purpose? Many turned to learning, mastering poetry, calligraphy, and philosophy. Bushido was refined into a moral code emphasizing self-discipline and service. Yet beneath the calm surface, tension lingered. A warrior without war is a blade without motion, sharp yet restless. Japan also closed itself to the outside world during this time. Foreign influence was tightly controlled, preserving tradition but limiting change. For over 2 centuries, this isolation allowed samurai culture to crystallize, becoming both idealized and rigid. Honor was no longer tested on battlefields, but in daily conduct, loyalty to authority, and adherence to ritual. As night deepens and thoughts slow, consider the legacy of the samurai. They were not merely soldiers. They were products of their environment, shaped by centuries of conflict, belief, and transformation. Their story is one of adaptation, of finding meaning in duty, even as the world changes around them. In the centuries that followed, modernity would arrive, and the samurai would fade from history. Yet their spirit endures, woven into Japan's identity, echoed in stories, films, and quiet acts of discipline and respect. As you drift towards sleep, let this ancient journey settle gently in your mind, a reminder that even in silence, history continues to speak. As the sun rose over feudal Japan, its pale light spilling across rice fields, mountain paths, and wooden towns, the life of a samurai began not with battle, but with ritual. The daily existence of a samurai was defined by discipline, repetition, and an unspoken awareness of mortality. Even during times of peace, every day was lived as if it could be the last. This mindset shaped how samurai walked, spoke, trained, and even slept. A samurai typically rose before dawn. Morning hours were considered sacred, a time when the mind was most clear and the body most receptive to training. Before touching a weapon, many samurai practiced quiet reflection or Zen meditation. Sitting in silence, they focused on breathing, emptying the mind of distraction. This practice was not spiritual luxury, it was preparation for death. A calm mind, free of fear, was essential for decisive action. Physical training followed. Sword practice was central, especially with the katana, though archery, spear fighting, and horseback riding remained vital skills. Training was relentless and repetitive. A single strike might be practiced thousands of times until movement became instinct. Samurai believed hesitation was fatal. On the battlefield, there was no time for thought, only action born from discipline. After training, daily duties depended on rank and era. During wartime, samurai prepared for campaigns, guarded castles, or escorted lords. During peace, many served as administrators, collecting taxes, resolving disputes, or enforcing law. Samurai were expected to be both warriors and officials, capable of violence yet restrained by law and honor. Meals were simple. A typical samurai diet consisted of rice, miso soup, vegetables, and fish. Excess was discouraged. Overindulgence was seen as weakness, a loss of self-control. Clothing, too, reflected restraint, functional garments designed for movement, layered according to season and status. Family life was shaped by duty. Samurai marriages were often arranged to strengthen alliances. Love was secondary to loyalty. Children were raised with strict discipline, taught obedience from an early age. Sons were trained to inherit the warrior path, daughters were taught endurance, loyalty, and household management, sometimes even weapon use for defense. Even leisure reflected discipline. Poetry, tea ceremony, calligraphy, and board games like Go were favored. These activities sharpened the mind and reinforced balance. A samurai who mastered only violence was considered incomplete. True strength lay in harmony between body, mind, and spirit, yet beneath this structured life lay constant tension. Honor was fragile. A single mistake could bring shame not only upon oneself, but upon one's entire family. Reputation mattered more than life. This pressure shaped every choice, every word spoken, every step taken. As night fell and lanterns flickered softly in wooden homes, samurai often cleaned their weapons with care, treating them not as tools, but as living extensions of the self. Sleep came lightly. Dreams were filled with duty, ancestors, and the unending awareness that tomorrow could demand everything. The image of the samurai is inseparable from his armor and weapons, yet these were not merely instruments of battle. They were symbols, carefully crafted expressions of identity, rank, and belief. Samurai armor evolved over centuries, adapting to changing warfare while maintaining deep cultural meaning. Early samurai armor was designed for mounted archery. Large, box-like plates protected the torso, while flexible silk cords bound the armor together, allowing movement. Over time, as sword combat became more prominent, armor grew lighter and more streamlined. Iron and leather plates were lacquered to protect against weather and rust, often in deep blacks, reds, or earthy tones. Helmets, known as kabuto, were among the most distinctive elements. Often adorned with crests, horns, or symbolic figures, they served both psychological and spiritual purposes. A fearsome helmet could intimidate enemies, while religious symbols offered protection. Many samurai believed their armor carried spiritual presence, linking them to ancestors and divine forces. The katana, however, stood above all else. More than a weapon, it was the soul of the samurai. Forged through a sacred process involving folding steel multiple times, each blade was unique. Swordsmiths worked with ritual purity, believing their craft bridged the physical and spiritual worlds. A samurai carried two swords, the katana and the wakizashi. Together, they symbolized status and readiness. To lose one's swords was to lose honor itself. Samurai were taught to treat their blades with reverence, never stepping over them, never drawing them without purpose. Combat was governed by unwritten rules. Before battle, samurai often announced their name and lineage, asserting honor before striking. While war grew more brutal over time, personal valor remained respected. Even enemies could admire courage and skill, yet warfare was not romantic. Battles were chaotic, filled with fear, confusion, and suffering. Arrows darkened the sky, spears clashed, and screams echoed across fields. Samurai faced death repeatedly, learning to accept its presence as constant and inevitable. Weapons training emphasized precision over strength. A single well-placed strike mattered more than brute force. This philosophy extended beyond combat. It shaped how samurai approached life itself. As centuries passed and firearms entered Japan, traditional warfare changed. Some samurai adapted, others resisted. Yet even as guns reshaped battlefields, the sword remained central to samurai identity, a symbol of continuity in a changing world. At the heart of samurai culture lay Bushido, the moral and philosophical framework that guided every action. Though not formally written until later periods, Bushido evolved organically, shaped by Shinto, Buddhism, and Confucianism. Bushido emphasized loyalty above all. A samurai's life belonged to his lord. Betrayal was unforgivable. This loyalty extended to family, ancestors, and tradition. Honor was inherited and protected across generations. Courage, however, was not recklessness. True bravery meant acting rightly despite fear. Compassion balanced strength. Samurai were expected to protect the weak, to show restraint in victory, and dignity in defeat. Perhaps most striking was the acceptance of death. Samurai were taught to consider themselves already dead. This mindset freed them from fear, allowing total commitment to duty. Ritual suicide, seppuku, though tragic, was seen as a means of restoring honor when it was lost. Bushido shaped Japanese culture far beyond the samurai class. Its values influenced education, leadership, and social conduct, echoing into modern times. As you drift deeper into rest, imagine the quiet resolve of a samurai walking beneath moonlight, armor resting beside him, sword at his side. His world is one of order and impermanence, where beauty and violence coexist, and where honor is carried like a steady flame through the darkness. As Japan moved deeper into the feudal age, power became rooted not only in swords, but in land, loyalty, and stone. At the center of this system stood the daimyo, regional lords who ruled vast territories on behalf of the shogun. Each daimyo was both governor and warlord, responsible for maintaining order, raising armies, and demonstrating unwavering loyalty to the central authority. Their power was visible across the landscape, most clearly in the castles that rose from hills, plains, and riverbanks like symbols of permanence in an uncertain world. Japanese castles were not merely military fortresses. They were administrative centers, homes, and statements of dominance. Built primarily of wood and stone, they were designed with layers of defense, moats, steep walls, narrow gates, and winding paths meant to confuse attackers. From above, castles appear almost labyrinthine, forcing enemies to expose themselves at every turn. Inside, however, they were carefully ordered spaces, reflecting hierarchy and control. At the heart of the castle stood the tenshu, the main keep, rising above the surrounding structures. From its highest point, a lord could survey his lands, a symbolic reminder that everything below belonged to him. Samurai lived within the castle town according to rank, with higher retainers closer to the keep and lower ones further away. Merchants and artisans occupied outer districts, while farmers remained beyond the walls, tied to the land they cultivated. Life under a daimyo was structured and predictable, yet heavy with obligation. Samurai pledged loyalty through formal oaths, binding themselves and their descendants to service. In return, the daimyo granted stipends, usually paid in rice, the measure of wealth in feudal Japan. This system ensured stability, but also dependence. A samurai without a lord became a ronin, masterless, dishonored, and often forced into poverty or mercenary work. The Tokugawa shogunate perfected control through regulation rather than constant war. Daimyo were required to spend alternating years in Edo, leaving their families behind as hostages when they returned to their domains. This system drained resources and discouraged rebellion. Castles, once centers of war, became symbols of obedience to a centralized peace, yet beneath this order, ambition never truly disappeared. Alliances shifted quietly. Old grudges lingered. Castles stood not only as homes, but as reminders of past wars and potential futures. They were monuments to the idea that peace was maintained not by trust, but by readiness. As night falls in this imagined landscape, lanterns glow softly within castle corridors. Guards move silently along walls. Somewhere, a daimyo contemplates loyalty and legacy, knowing that power, like all things, is temporary. Despite long periods of peace, the memory of war shaped samurai identity. Certain battles became legends, passed down through chronicles, songs, and later, theater. These were not merely conflicts over land, but moments when fate itself seemed to turn point. One such battle was Sekigahara, fought in 1600. It was here that Tokugawa Ieyasu secured his dominance, paving the way for over 2 centuries of Tokugawa rule. The battlefield was cloaked in fog, armies moving blindly, loyalty shifting mid-combat. Victory came not only from strength, but from strategy and betrayal. Sekigahara marked the end of widespread civil war and the beginning of enforced peace. Other battles were remembered for heroism rather than outcome. Samurai like Minamoto no Yoshitsune became romantic figures, brilliant tacticians doomed by political rivalry. His story, filled with loyalty, exile, and tragic death, captured the imagination of generations. Yoshitsune symbolized the ideal warrior, skilled, noble, and betrayed by the very system he served. Then there was Miyamoto Musashi, perhaps the most famous swordsman in Japanese history. A ronin who fought over 60 duels without defeat, Musashi represented a different path, one of self-mastery rather than service. He wrote of strategy not as violence, but as understanding timing, perception, and the self. His life blurred the line between legend and reality. Battles were not always grand. Many were brief, brutal, and forgotten. Yet each left scars on the land and memory of the people. Samurai carried these histories with them, shaping how they viewed honor, loyalty, and fate. Even in peace, stories of battle served a purpose. They reminded warriors of who they were supposed to be. They warned against arrogance. They honored sacrifice. In a world without war, memory became the battlefield where identity was preserved. As your thoughts slow, imagine the echo of footsteps on wet grass, banners moving in the wind, and the quiet tension before a clash. These moments, frozen in time, still whisper through Japan's cultural memory. No era lasts forever. By the mid-19th century, the world beyond Japan's shores could no longer be ignored. Western powers arrived with steamships, firearms, and demands for trade. The Tokugawa system, rigid and inward-focused, began to crack. Samurai, once guardians of order, found themselves facing a future that had no place for them. The Meiji Restoration of 1868 marked the official end of samurai rule. Feudal domains were dissolved. Stipends were abolished. Wearing swords in public was banned. In a single generation, a class that had ruled for centuries was stripped of its identity. Some samurai resisted. Rebellions flared briefly, driven by nostalgia and desperation. Others adapted, becoming military officers, teachers, or civil servants. Many struggled, their skills no longer valued in a modernizing world, yet the samurai did not vanish entirely. Their values transformed rather than disappeared. Bushido was reinterpreted, woven into modern Japanese ideals of discipline, loyalty, and perseverance. Schools taught moral education inspired by warrior ethics. Soldiers carried the symbolic legacy of the samurai into modern conflicts. Today, the samurai live on through stories, films, martial arts, and quiet cultural habits, bowing, respect for duty, and attention to detail. They remain symbols not of violence, but of commitment to purpose. As this journey comes to rest, remember that the samurai were human. They feared, hoped, failed, and endured. Their world was harsh, yet deeply reflective. In their silence, we find echoes of our own search for meaning. As you drift fully into sleep, let the final image be this: a lone sword resting beside armor, untouched by time, waiting not for battle, but for remembrance.